Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And because we have completed doing the Torah portion and the Rashi on this week's Sedra Bahar, we are going back to Genesis and continuing where we left off. Yesterday we finished up the portion on the seven Noahide laws, and today we're going to start a new verse. And here we are, verse 18. Vayomer Hashem Elohim, the Lord God said, Lo tov, it is not good, heyot ha'adam levado, for Adam to be by himself. E'eseh lo ezer kenegdo, I will make for him a helpmate, right? A helper opposite him, literally, is what it means. And there's a midrash that says that if he is worthy, this person will be an azer, there'll be a help. And if he's not worthy, she'll be kenegdo, she will oppose him on everything. So there we go. All right. Lo tov, etc. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, said Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel. Afal pi sheyesh lo la'adam kama banim, despite the fact that a person may have several sons, asur la'amod labelo isha, it is forbidden for him to remain without a wife, without a woman. So the point about this is the issue of the reason that we get married underneath it all is to procreate. And what he's saying, and it's a mitzvah to procreate. It's a commandment to be fruitful and multiply. That is discussed elsewhere as to what is the fulfillment of that requirement. Essentially, Beit Shammai say to have two sons, and Hillel, I believe, says to have a son and a daughter. In other words, basically two children, and you fulfilled the minimum requirement to fulfill that mitzvah. So, at any rate, so here he's fulfilled. This is the point. He's fulfilled his commandment to be fruitful and multiply, but nevertheless, he still needs to have a partner, a wife. Shne'emar, as it states, Lo tov heyet adam levado. It is not a good thing for a man to be by himself. And that's from Tractate Yevamot, page 61b. Let's take a look. Okay. Want to make sure I've got the right place here. Yeah, Mem Aleph. So that is right here, right? This is where is that Mem? Forgive me. We're looking at footnote Mem. Let me find the place right here. Lich ora, it would appear, bilashon hapasuk, that the language of the verse, ein nirmas isur, there's no suggestion of a prohibition, right? Because that's what Rab Nachman is saying in the name of Samuel, that basically in this positive commandment, there's a prohibition of a man remaining single. And what he's saying, what Torah Temimah is saying is that it doesn't appear to have a negative connotation in this particular verse. It's simply Varak Eitzah. It's merely a suggestion, right? V'hoda'ah ba'alma. It's only telling you, it's only revealing a suggestion. It's saying it's a nice thing to do. It's not suggesting that if you don't do it, you're not fulfilling a mitzvah. But the issue is ki ha'etzah hazot, that this suggestion, right? This suggestion, me'achar sheyatzah me'et HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because this suggestion is coming from the Holy One, blessed be He, hayta achar kach mitzvah. For that reason, it becomes a mitzvah, and if you don't perform the mitzvah, etc. So it is, I don't know that in our culture we are used to that. But it's like when the big boss tells you, be nice if you showed up at 8 o'clock. They aren't simply saying, well, you may want to, if you want it, it's fine. What they're saying to you is, you better show up at 8 o'clock because it's the big boss. And that's kind of the implication that he's telling us here, that when Hashem makes a suggestion to you, you do it, right? The old story about if God says to you, jump, you say, the response is, how high? And that's exactly the way in which, the deciders of the rabbis of Jewish law do these kinds of things. They want to know how one can perfect the idea of God's commandments. In other words, if God is commanding us, to what extent can we try to perform them as perfectly as possible? Anyway, that's not the end of the story. Ach bichlal, but he says, nevertheless, tzarich biur inyan halashon. We need to clarify this business, right? The whole issue of the language here, lo tov, that it's not good, right? Because that definitely sounds like, it's simply saying it's not a good thing, etc. And he goes on to say, Eser lo ezer. So because it isn't a good thing, I'm going to make him a helpmate. The mashma, because that implies that kol ikar briyat ha'isha, that the very essence of the root, right, the essence of the creation of the woman, who rak mipnei shelo tov lo levado, that the only reason for this was because it isn't good for him to be by himself. That's the only reason. והלא כיוון דקיום העולם תלוי בחליפי הדורות, right? But because the very existence, the very sustenance of the world is dependent on the fact that the generations are able to switch from one generation to the next, right? It's not like we only have one generation, because if there was only one generation, that would be the end of humanity, right? Uvnei Adam ki isvei hasadeh, and in fact, human beings are compared to the grass of the field, halalu, right? This grass of the field, notzetzim, they blossom, halalu, halalu notzlim, these blossom, halalu novlim, and these others wither. And that's actually a quote from the Talmud, right? It's necessary. Im kain, and for this reason, vehechreach, it is a necessary thing, levriat zachar unekeva, to create male and female, letachlit priya verivia, in order to accomplish, right, the purpose of procreation. It was necessary. It isn't just, well, it's not nice for a person to be by themselves, right? So he's raising some issues here, right? V'yesh lomar, and one could say, the ikar ha'inyan, that the very essence and of this particular matter, v'hakavana, and the intention, sheyichyu ha'ish v'ha'isha chaye ishut miyuchadim. The whole idea is that the man and the woman should live in a state, I would say, a special state of matrimony. That's what's behind this, the idea of matrimony. V'lo yifru, and not just that they yifru v'yirvu, and not that they should just be fruitful and not chaye hefker, in a casual kind of way. A guy meets a girl, they procreate, and that's the end of the matter. But the idea here is that this sentence is talking about the matrimonial state, right? Kamo habahemot, just like the animals. The animals don't basically have matrimony. I know that in the case of swans, apparently there are animals that mate for life, but there are many animals. In fact, you'd say that most animals don't mate for life, right? They simply mate for the purpose of procreation. So look at how we're analyzing this verse. She'ein lahem chukei ishud, because the animals don't have laws of matrimony, the yichusei toldot, and not only that, the idea of genealogy, right? The idea of genealogy, v'chayim rak al pi hateva levad, and they simply act according to nature. That's all they do. So he's helped us to understand a deeper sense of this particular verse. So going on to the next one. Lo tov. So another, also from Yevamot, and it's actually from Sham means Ibid, right? In the same place, Tractate Yevamot, and this is on page 82. Sorry, 62, 62b, and this was 61b, right? So very close. Amar Rabbi Chanilai said, Kol mi she'en lo isha, any person who does not have a woman, in other words, a female companion. And again, how literally you take this, of course, has to do with the culture that we're living in. But obviously the intention would appear to be the idea of heterosexuality here. Sharui belotova, he remains without goodness. He doesn't have real goodness in his life. Shne'emar, as it states, lo tov heyet hadam labado. It is not good for a man to be all by himself. So again, how one wants to interpret the man-woman, well, in terms of it's complicated, clearly, I'm aware of this. And the issue is, I think that we understand that in principle and in generality, that is the way things should be. But on the other hand, I don't think it gives one license to be anti-gay and to take steps that make lives of people who are not heterosexual miserable. The Torah is speaking, my understanding is the Torah is trying to make general statements that are true for the vast majority of people. But the truth is, we also know that circumstances alter cases and that Jewish law also takes that into account. At any rate, let's go on now with the Torah Temimah. So he says, well, if you just started here, do check what I wrote, right? What we wrote in the previous interpretation. And it is further explained in the Gemara, clarified in the Gemara, that is in the Talmud, Shisharui belo bracha, not only that he is without good, he is also without blessing. Dichtiv, as it states in Ezekiel 44, chapter 44, lahaniach bracha al beitecha, to place a blessing on your home. And we understand this is what the square brackets are saying, uveto zo ishto, that the word bayit, right, the word bayit that means a house, is also understood as a metaphor for a woman, right? So the idea of ben comes from a root that means to build, and bat, that means a son, right? Ben is son in Hebrew, bat is daughter, and the word bat also comes from a home. And by the way, I have to say that I remember years ago reading the book Childhood and Society by Erik Erikson, and he used to have these building blocks in his waiting room, and he'd see how the little boys generally would build towers with the blocks, and the girls would build little caves. They would build, as it were, a circle. They'd make a circle with the blocks with an opening on it. Just interesting how this is reflected in the language here. Ora, and it would then appear tzarich iyun. We need to look into investigate this. We need to look further. Shelo heviyu hapasuk shebatorah. That in fact that there in the Gemara they did not bring the verse shebatorah that's in the Torah. In other words, that they preferred a verse from Ezekiel than a verse from the Torah. And the verse in the Torah says, Vayvarech otam Elohim, which it says there explicitly, it says, God blessed them. The ire beinyane zivugan, because it also, it's dealing with, right, the issues of coupling, right? V'yesh lomar. So how do you answer this particular difficulty? Mishum de ota bracha. The reason is that that particular blessing nit parsha rak lepiria v'rivya, and the reason is that that blessing that with which God blessed them in the Torah refers strictly to procreation, v'lichvosh haaretz, and also to having control over the land, over the earth, conquering the earth. Masha ein kain, which does not apply habracha shebiyecheskel, to the blessing that's mentioned in the book of Ezekiel. Bracha stam, where there it is simply an overarching blessing, hakolelet kol minei bracha, which includes every kind of blessing. So let's go a little further. E'eseh lo ezer, I shall make for him a helper. Ashkechinan Rabbi Yossi leEliyahu. So Rabbi Yossi happened upon Elijah. Amarlo, he said to him, Kativ eselo ezer. It says, he's saying this to Eliyahu, Rabbi Yossi, it says, I will make for him a helper. Ba'ameh isha ozarto la'olam. In what way is a woman a helper to a human being? Amarle. So Elijah said to him, Adam mevi chitim. The man brings wheat. V'chi chitim koses. And does he in fact grind the wheat? Pishtan. If he brings flax, v'chi pishtan lovesh. Does he wear? Do he eat wheat, for example? Does he wear flax? V'halo nimtzet me'ira einav. And so we see that she, in fact, brings light to his eyes. Umamidato al raglav, and she sets him up on his legs. And this is also from Yevamot, and it's the next page, right? Page 63. So the very nature. Now, again, to what degree this applies in our current society, the roles are not quite so clearly defined as they were earlier on in man's history. But regardless, the idea of these roles that women played and made it possible for men to function. But I think there's another point here, because we know that throughout history, men tended to put women as second-class citizens. And in some ways, what this statement is saying is don't think that they really are partners, and they make it possible for us to function as men. So let's take a look here. Lich ora, and it would appear, he tshuva pishutit, that this is a very simple, clear explanation. Ad shelo haita tshuva kolchach, to the point, it's such a simple explanation, to a point shelo haita tshuva kolchach lahashoel lahishal me'eliyahu, that it wasn't so important to ask Elijah from Elijah to get this kind of answer. Ve'leish lomar, and one could say, mishum de ezer, the reason is that the word helper, shayach bishnayim, right? That when we talk about a helper, that refers to two. It requires a partnership. She'osim melacha achat, that they are both involved in one labor, that they're helping each other. Ma she'en kain melachot anashim yuchadot, right? Which is not the case with labors of individual people. Le anashim anashim, I think is what it's saying. Miyuchadot anashim. That is not the case with men, I believe, that are with men. Umelachot nashim lenashim, and the kinds of labor, in other words, the kinds of labor men do for one another, and the kinds of labor that women do for one another. V'sha'al bameh ozarto belachot shelo, and he was asking, in what way does she help him with his labor? V'heshiv ki shnehem osim b'maaseh halechem v'abeged. And he replied by saying, because the two of them are involved in creating bread and in clothing. V'gam yesh lomar, and one could say further, sheba la'ir remes b'Torah, that he came, that is Elijah, came to clarify an allusion in the Torah, al chiyuv melachot, regarding the necessity right? The obligation of the labor sha'isha osa leva'ala, that the woman performs for her husband. The kaimalan, because we have a tradition, we accept shehu chiyuv min Torah, that these kinds of things that women were doing for their husbands was actually a Torah obligation. V'af al pi de beketuvot nimtet beit, and despite the fact that in the Tractate Ketubot, page 59b, chashvu harbe al melachot, they enumerated many kinds of labor, tochenet, the fact that she grinds things, right? She grinds the corn for ofa, and she bakes, umechabeset, and she washes, she does the laundry, umevashelet, and she cooks, umenika et bana, and she keeps the children clean, umatzaat lo hamita, and she also prepares the bed. She makes the bed for osa batzemer, and the work she does with wool. But kan chashiv rak shtaim, and here it only mentions the two. It mentions grinding the wheat for the bread, and it mentions helping, spin the material for clothing. Yesh lomar, and for this reason, why does it only mention these two here? Yesh lomar de tafis melacha rishona ba'achorna, right? That what it did was it took hold of, literally, the first labor, in other words, food, v'achorna, and the last, me hachashuvot sham. It took the first and the last labors that were mentioned in that particular listing. Uve'emet kevan lekulo, kiven lekulo. And in truth, even though it mentions only two, because it mentions the first one and the last one, it really intends to include all of them, all of them. And that's what we will finish with for today. All right. So we will take care of this to right here to God willing, tomorrow. And I'm going to stop the share. Oh, wow. Okay. All of you are here. So before I stop the recording, do any of you want to make any comments? Golda, yes? Hi. Did you want to say
It just
anything?
seems like the woman just does an awful lot of work.
She
Just a
does.
lot of
She
work.
does. She does.
But, but
Yes.
she gets help sometimes, children.
Well, children are a lot of care. You know that, Golda. You have
Yeah.
children. You know. It's tremendous work. Yes.
Yes.
Incredible. Right.
What
And I
about
really
co-spouses
say
and
that again.
Yeah.
Say that again.
co-spouses and handmaidens,
Yes,
Yep.
understood. Right. They
fellow
did have the,
concubines?
yes,
Yep.
right. True.
And the ever-present slaves. Uh,
Yeah,
but
you had
yeah.
to be wealthy enough for that.
Yeah.
And you know that within Jewish tradition, I don't think there's a real push to get slaves. You know what I'm saying? I don't think
Yeah.
it's something that we're really looking to have. But I also,
Poor relations looking for a wife.
there is. Well, but again, I think for me, what comes out of this, is the tendency for men to underestimate just how significant a role women play to help them exist. I mean, that's what's
Oh,
coming out, right? That when God created women, and again, please understand this from a literary perspective, right? And literature trying to help us understand the deeper issues that involve life, right? That is one of the things that's coming out of this that I think actually, I mean, maybe just my opinion, is really beautiful and profound and important. And when you look at when this stuff was being written and all those centuries, where men did not appreciate women and treated them like second-class citizens to this day, actually.
yeah. And maybe again.
Yeah, right. Anyway, okay.
Yeah.